Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Professor Norman Cornett, religious studies scholar and specialist on the relationship between aesthetics and spirituality. That is to say, the arts and spirituality. I'm here with composer, arranger, pianist Matt Herskowitz, with whom I've had the privilege of collaborating for over 20 years.
Wow.
Thank you, Matt Herskowitz, for joining us.
Wow, thank you. Nice to see you.
Matt Herskowitz, you began music as a child. You took your first lessons when you were 7 years old. You performed your first concert when you were 9 years old. Of all that you could have done with your life, why music?
Yeah, well, I never really had any other choices. That's basically why. I decided at age like 3 or perhaps even a little earlier that I wanted to be a pianist. I knew
At 3 years old?
Yeah. I knew that's what I wanted to be. And I never considered anything else. And when I got my first piano at age 7, I wanted to play, for example, Liszt Liebesträume No. 3. So in like a few weeks, I was basically playing it, and I wanted to play Rachmaninoff Prelude, C sharp minor, and so I did that. And
At 7 years old?
yeah, so I was like, it was like water to me. This is what I wanted to do. This is what I needed to do. So I never considered a career or anything else until I was like maybe a teenager, and then I thought, oh, it might be nice to be a writer. I enjoy writing. It's a lot of fun. I'm pretty good at it, and I flirted with that. But I never really wavered from the idea that music was and was always going to be my life.
That seems unique because, if I understand correctly, Matt Herskowitz, you do not come necessarily from a family of musicians.
I do not necessarily or unnecessarily come from a family of musicians. They're completely amusical.
So
many of them atonal.
But it seems that you almost had a sense of a mission in life from childhood.
Yeah. I mean, it's obviously as a child you don't think of it like that because you don't know, thinking, I have to make a living and all that. But I was like, yeah, this is what I'm here to do. This is what I want to do. This is all I want to do.
Well, that's interesting because as a religious studies scholar, there's an expression for this. It's called a vocation.
Okay.
A vocation isn't just a job or employment or a check or a salary or a pension or a career.
Or a casual interest.
It is, this is what makes me tick.
Yeah. So music is my vocation. And it's always been composing and performing.
Now, for your generation, Matt Herskowitz, you've just mentioned Franz Liszt, you've just mentioned Rachmaninoff.
Yeah.
This is ironic because you were born in arguably an apogee of rock and roll music, to say nothing of the ongoing folk music scene.
Yeah.
What led you to classical music rather than rock and roll?
Well, it's what I knew. My mom played me classical records, specifically Van Cliburn, I think, to put me to sleep. And that's what I took to. That's what I wanted. I knew about rock music. I just wasn't interested in it at the time. But I became interested in rock music culture, especially prog rock, in my teens, early teens, and then I started. But up until then, I was purely classical. I mean, with the exception of Gershwin, if you consider classical plus jazz, and certainly Gershwin is jazz as well. And ragtime. I had a teacher that got me on ragtime. I loved ragtime. I loved Gershwin.
Ragtime as in Scott Joplin?
Yeah,
or?
as in Scott Joplin, and all those. He's the most prominent, obviously. There are others, Louis Chauvin, James Scott, and Rhapsody in Blue was something I performed at 12, 11 or 12, something like that. So I loved that, and I loved sort of improvising on like romantic music and composing in a kind of a quasi-romantic style. Back at 9 years old or something like that. It's what I loved. So that was my interests. I wasn't interested in like rock or pop music scene until a bit later. So I became informed about it, and I became like not as knowledgeable as anybody later about the rock scene. But at the from between the ages of like 7 and 12 or something like that, I was only interested in classical. That was all.
Now, it's interesting that you've used a word almost as a leitmotif, romantic. You mentioned Liszt, you mentioned Rachmaninoff, who is late Romanticism. Why specifically, of all the classical music, the corpus of Romanticism particularly appealed to you?
Yeah, that's just kind of my music. That's what spoke to me. It always has. Like I've always been drawn to Rachmaninoff and Chopin and romantic music. Liszt, romantic music.
Robert Schumann.
Schumann, yes. I really love Schubert. Now Schubert is like in between, but he's a romantic at heart. He really is.
And Brahms?
Yes, to a lesser extent. It's a different kind of romanticism. I appreciate Brahms more now. But it didn't. I loved certain pieces by Brahms, but there were also pieces I just didn't understand. I didn't really get it. It wasn't as immediate for me. Like Rachmaninoff, I really got. I really understood that, and I feel like Chopin, I got as well.
Speaking of Chopin, who of course is French-Polish,
Scriabin, I really loved. Yeah.
And Scriabin and Rachmaninoff, the Russian school of Romanticism seems to particularly attract you. In fact, the very first time that we did a dialogic workshop on your music, I played in a basement room with no windows. All of my students were blindfolded, and I put on one of your recordings. And it was, in fact, Glazunov, concerto, and you were the invited solo.
Sounds like something that'd be illegal today.
And it was a unique experience. So Glazunov, this whole, is it because of the ethos, the spirit, the mood, the ambiance that this Russian Romanticism?
I don't know. I think it's sort of in my genes. I'm not sure. Like it's, this kind of romanticism. It can't really be. This is one thing that can't really be taught. Like you're either drawn to it or you're not. Like Van Cliburn was a romantic, right? Like he didn't really need to be taught it. He's, an American doesn't win the Tchaikovsky competition because he doesn't understand romanticism. Like it was, he incarnated the Tchaikovsky concerto, and Rachmaninoff, Sonata, like all the pieces, and Horowitz as well, and all these romantic pianists. Then you have pianists like Alfred Brendel in classical, or Murray Pariah, like they're Mitsuru Uchida, where you're not going to pay to hear them play Rachmaninoff. That's not their thing. They are Beethoven, Mozart, Schubert, this. It's when I went to school at classical, they were saying like, your romantic music is great, but if you can't play Mozart properly, you can't graduate. And for me, that's just like, but that's not what music is about. Like, they said this at the time when Van Cliburn had made a career not playing a note of Mozart. Like, why does your Mozart have to be as good as why do you have to be equally good? Nobody's equally, because music it's not mathematics. There's mathematics in it, but in mathematics you're expected to sort of know everything. Like you can't really function in mathematics. With algebra without geometry, you can't. You need trigonometry, you need calculus, you need to sort of be able to do it all. But with music, it's perfectly fine to be a Bach specialist. It's perfectly fine to be a romantic specialist. And instead of encouraging that, they punished you for it. And I hope that's not the case today, but yes, give someone a well-rounded education, just like in the liberal arts, or like expose people to everything, but don't make them be as good at it as, because people are going to, be good at what they're good at. And for me, romantic music spoke directly to my soul. It speaks directly to my soul. I understand it. And, the people who play, let's say, who really have that with Mozart, they have that affinity, but they don't really have it with Scriabin or Tchaikovsky. That's fine. Like, no one's asking them to, right? Yet if you play, Russian romantic music, then they say, well, what about your Mozart? It's essentially saying is that, well, that's the better music you need to, Well, no, music is music, and no one in the Romantic era made somebody pass the Mozart test or the Bach test. I agree that everybody should know about this music and everybody should understand it. But and of course Van Cliburn played Mozart. Of course he did. Of course he put. That's like. But he was like, that's not my strength. I'm not recording it. No one made him do that. And Horowitz was unusual. He really could do it all. And he recorded it all. But other pianists record what they sure, Tchaikovsky, he stuck to what he loved. The great pianist Mieczysław Horszowski from that I knew from Curtis Institute he was like a Schumann and German romantic specialist, and he really but anything he played was amazing. But people should be encouraged to play what they love. And to write what they love. I mean, in literature, you wouldn't ask somebody to write about what they're not passionate about.
It's interesting. Another leitmotif in this dialogue, Matt Herskowitz, ironically, is Van Cliburn. I say that because, like Van Cliburn, I'm from Texas. Yeah, and Van Cliburn was from Fort Worth. And I remember vividly in primary school when Van Cliburn, because I was born in 1950, when Van Cliburn won the competition, it was, well, the sky's the limit then for an American musician.
That's right.
And why do I particularly emphasize that? Because when he won it, we were at the height of the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union.
Yeah, they didn't want to give it to him.
And it was like music breaks through even that Iron Curtain.
Yeah, because the people loved Van Cliburn, and for them to not give it to him would be an insult to their own people who chose him. The people chose, the Russian people there chose Van Cliburn. It was obvious. So of course they gave it to him. They had no choice. And music is one of the only things that can do that.
Now you also mentioned Alfred Brendel, who I had the privilege of hearing in concert.
One of my favorites.
Yeah, I often associate him with the Renaissance musician, by which I mean Alfred Brendel also composed poetry.
Yep.
And I surmise that because of his engagement in writing and specifically composing poetry, there was a concern for precision, for an economy of means, for saying the most with the least. And what I will never forget in hearing Alfred Brendel in concert was that sense of reserve.
Yeah.
That sense of, I'm not here to make a show. I'm here, there was that understated approach that I am simply the servant of the music.
Like Maria Joao Perez, the same thing. But Alfred Brendel sort of became famous like in his 40s. So he was already a mature, artist.
Yeah.
And I think that makes a difference. Like when kind of teenagers burst on, they're under a lot of pressure to perform, and it's in a way it's liberating to sort of break in when you're in your 40s. You don't have to do that. But yeah, it's incredible, his economy, but also like I know his the person who produced a lot of his albums, and apparently he was like, he was as in the studio as he was at concert. He just and he wasn't real picky about fixing a lot of wrong notes either. He was like, this is my performance.
Now you've used another key word, it seems to me, in the life of the composer, arranger, musician, and that is pressure. You began piano lessons at 7, you have your first concert at 9, later you go to the Juilliard School of Music, you go to the Curtis School of Music, and can you speak to us, Matt Herskowitz, about the pressure of classical music, and specifically address perfectionism?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been a perfectionist, but I really didn't like the pressure of the sort of competitive pressure, and like I wanted to do what I love to do, and but for my recitals, graduation recital, I had to do lots of stuff that I just didn't really understand, and I had to pretend that I got it, and I followed the instructions from my teacher, and but I wasn't really. The music wasn't flowing through me, and with me. It was me trying to be a little bit of an imposter. I felt.
That's a very strong word. Be a little bit of an imposter.
Yeah, because like there's such a difference between playing the stuff that I loved, that I really wanted to play, and then playing the things that I really didn't want to play. So then, the recital was mixed. Well, yeah, of course it was mixed. And I think it's important to be introduced and to play everything. As many the two things I've always loved, Bach and Chopin. Rachmaninoff as well, but really Bach and Chopin, and that's ever since I was at school, and I love playing Bach, and like I wished that I was able to play more like full partitas and English suites in concert, but that sort of was no, you should balance it out, but. I really love playing Bach, and I love Chopin, and in my life since, these are the two composers of which I sort of built my career on as an arranger, and like jazzing up. Like I don't do them pure. I make my jazz arrangements, and I've done 2 albums of Bach. With my jazz trio, and I just released a video on Medici TV platform of my jazz Chopin etudes. It was from a performance at Salle Bourgie, and so that's the first time they've been commercially released. And those were 8 or 9 of my jazz arrangements of Chopin etudes, and. It's funny because like I diverged from classical. I decided it wasn't really for me. Like my heart wasn't in making classical music a career for myself. That wasn't like, there were other things that I wanted to do as well, and I didn't want to singularly dedicate everything to classical music. So I really love jazz as much, so I dedicated, like I was like, okay, I need to master this. But in the end, it came full circle where I used my jazz to reinterpret Chopin and Bach. So First Bach and then Chopin. And it's funny how that comes full circle, you know, like where I started out with Bach and Chopin as very young, and then I've come back to it, but in a new form.
It intrigues me that you've spoken just as much about Bach as you have about Chopin. And why do I say that? As you know, in Canada, one of the foremost classical musicians, pianist, Glenn Gould, who essentially worshipped at the altar of Bach.
Yep.
But in the same breath, derided Chopin, whose music he considered indicative of the industrial age.
The industrial age?
Yeah, and I'm paraphrasing here.
Chopin?
Yeah, and of course Gould came to the.
Well, I love Glenn Gould, but I have to admit I don't understand that one.
Well, and what
before.
intrigues me equally, as you well know, Glenn Gould came to the conclusion, I will perform in the studio,
right,
not before the audience.
That's right. Yeah, he didn't want. I'm sort of the opposite. I've always been the opposite. Like, I need the audience. I need to perform on stage to give my best performance. It's hard for me in the studio. For him, it was the opposite. And I can understand that because I just take what's comfortable for me, and that's what was comfortable for him. And then what was not comfortable for me is comfortable for him. So that's fine. He was one of the rare ones to be able to pull that off. He could actually, he was so famous and so sought after, and back then, of course, you could make money selling albums. So he could say, I'm quitting performing, and I'm just going to do recording. That's what I want to do, and then I can obsess over every note and do all the edits I want, and I can be at home in my comfort zone. You know, in pop music, Steely Dan decided the same thing. They were like, Donald Fagen, they were like, yeah, well, we don't really want to perform live. We just want to make albums. So we just want to create a product, and then here's our product. You know, and
well, you mentioned Steely Dan, but I think immediately of Brian Wilson, who wants to leave the concert circuit, the tours, and it all becomes a matter of creating in the studio, like Pet Sounds. That seems to be a decision, as though the musician comes to a crossroads. Where do I invest my creativity and my energy?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, you want to, at a certain point, you can't do everything. So you want to do what, not only what you're good at, but what is the most satisfying and rewarding. What's the most rewarding thing? You know, is it being a sideman for other people and like being a chameleon and saying, yeah, I can make that song sound way better, you know, with my touch. That's something that the people who love that, who love being that, do it the best. And they're sought after. And it's a different thing from having your own very distinct voice that you can't really change that. You know, then that's harder to do that job if you can't change, if you can't adapt to, you know. Now the people who do that, the studio musicians, of course they have their own sound, but they're able to adapt to any style. And I feel like I can do that because I'm familiar with a bunch of styles, but at heart I'm a soloist. That's where I want to be. That's where I want to be, is, you know, my voice is kind of, you know, like it's unique. It's just mine. I've honed it over the years, and there's no one else that really sounds like me. So, you know, that's what a soloist is, essentially. So I've stuck with that. And for better or worse, I've stuck with that because that's what I wanted to do. And I turned down all the other work, and I just stuck to being a soloist. And, you know, it's doing that has its ups and downs and its risks. And I think if I had to do all over again, I would do the same thing. because it's been, you know, you as you said, you can't replace having a rewarding career and getting up every day and loving what you're doing. You know, that's, if you can do that and be successful enough that that's all you need to do, and you don't have to deliver pizzas on the side, then that's great. You know, then I'll take that.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us with this dialogue. Our guest, composer, arranger, Matt Herskowitz, and I believe you heard more than once him talk about the heart. And as a religious studies scholar, I think immediately of Augustine, who said, "The heart has reasons which reason does not know."